Welcome back on Texas Football. I'm CJ Vogel. I'm joined by Rod Babers. We're going to look ahead a little bit to the Texas-Georgia game. What did Sark figure out last year in the two games against Georgia? Of course, only 17 passing yards in the first half of the first game. It got pretty ugly, Rod, but Sark did figure things out. This episode of On Texas Football brought to you by Duck Camp, our good friends over there. And before we get into some of the themes, some of the changes and adjustments Steve Sarkisian made, Rod, a quick word about our friends over at Duck Camp.
Yes, sir. Duck Camp makes gear for folks who live for being out there, whether that's in a duck blind at sunrise or on the 40 acres for a Saturday kickoff. Born right here in the great city of Austin, Duck Camp builds best-in-class hunting and fishing apparel that works just as well for a full day in the field as it does for a long day of tailgating. From sun protection shirts that keep you cool during those early season scorchers to their iconic game series hats that feel like instant classics. Duck Camp gear is ready for football season, hunting season, and every season in between. Get out there, stay out there, and hook 'em horns from our friends over at Duck Camp. Shop Duck Camp at duckcamp.com. That's duckcamp.com, and use the code ONTexas25 for 25% off. That's a great deal for my friends over at Duck Camp. Thank you very much. We appreciate them for sponsoring this segment of On Texas Football.
Yes, we do. And Rod, I know that it might be a chilly one down there in Athens, so get your Duck Camp and load up. But we talked about it a little bit. 17 passing yards in the first half of the first game against Georgia. That then turned into 358 passing yards by Quinn Ewers in the SEC championship game. Yep. Texas obviously did not win that game, but they figured out how to move the football against the Georgia defense. And I know that you had some interesting numbers, some interesting trends there that Texas and Steve Sarkisian unveiled to allow them to have some big-time success moving the football.
Yeah, the first thing that I noticed on the rewatch was, Sark in that second half, he came up with ways to punish the Georgia defense for their aggression. Because Georgia's defense, they're very well prepared. I mean, Kirby Smart's got those guys well prepared. Take away your staples, so they're quick keys and fast flow defenses. So they see a key, they go. They don't hesitate. They're not gonna be patient and try to confirm the read. No, they go. They're a fast flow, quick read defense, which makes them so good. But also, you can use that against them. And they have what they call ag beaters, which are aggression beaters. Now, sometimes these are double moves, different things that you can use to use a team's aggression against them. Sark did a lot of that in the second half of that first matchup. Remember that Matthew Golden double move, right? It's a big 34-yarder. You can actually throw the touchdown to Isaiah Bond in that category as well, if you like, because they have that kind of that Andy Reid zigzag motion where he's trying to lose that DB. If that DB wants to crash down on that motion, or they want to bump the coverage really quickly, you can still make them punt. You can punish them for that. So I throw that in that category. I would even throw the Texas route in that category as well, because that Texas route, it almost runs like an option route the way Blue used to run it. He can run it as he is trying to bend his way or give a stem to an out route. He can run it as a wheel route, or he can cut it back underneath if that linebacker is over leveraged. And Jaden Blue was great at it, because basically if you guess wrong, I mean, if you were one step behind, you might as well be 5 steps behind Jaden Blue. He's gone. Exactly. That's why it was a great play for him. And Sark used a lot of those concepts. He actually had a whip route before Isaiah Bond scored touchdown. Go watch him. There's a batted pass. It's a whip route that they're trying to complete too, which is also kind of one of those ag beaters. The guys who are really aggressive. If that corner is going to jump that in cut or jump that kind of slant, then you got him coming up the whip routes. So I thought he did a great job with those types of concepts. That was even remember the pass interference in the second half on Matthew Golden. Remember, that's a burst concept. He stops like he's going to run a hitch route and then continues to the back of the end zone. So also kind of a double move that can work as an aggression beater. And I think he actually carried that over to the second game in the SEC title game. If you go look at double moves, kind of what I'm calling ag beaters, remember, he starts off with that stalk. You got that stalk, that reverse whip by DeAndre Moore early in the game. Remember, it was a third down, and they ran a reverse whip, got him 22 yards on 3rd and 4. They ran that hitch and go on the outside with Matthew Golden. That double move got him another 32 yards. They ran a stalk slant for a touchdown because you know that Georgia's going to take away your staples. So they rushed that slant. DeAndre Moore wide open, right? Right. For a touchdown there. So there were several concepts like that. So when I counted all those types of concepts, those ag beaters, as I described them, in that game, you ended up going over 18 yards per attempt on ag beaters. And they were special situations. Think about it. There were 6 of these, 7 total, because you tried the Gunnar Helm, remember the stalk block and go? They tried it and it was a penalty. Remember they tried it in that game. It ended up being a penalty. So it's totally 7 concepts that kind of uses a team's aggression against them. But you ended up with, over 100 yards on those concepts, and they were in special situations. You had a lot of them on 3rd down, the 22-yard reverse whip by DeAndre Moore, 3rd and 4. 3rd and 14 for the 32-yard double move by Matthew Golden. 3rd and 3 for the 41-yard stalk slant touchdown to DeAndre Moore. A 4th and 2 on a 5-yard whip route by DeAndre Moore. So it was actually start thinking critical moments, special situations. I got a special ingredient. I got a special concept that'll make Georgia pay for being well prepared for critical moments, because that's Kirby Smart football, and I'm going to use their aggression against them. Love the ag beater. That was one of my first things I wrote down.
Now, when you went back and watched that first Texas-Georgia game, was it more, I guess, did it stand out to you, the lack of ag beaters, or was it more, hey, the offensive line was a little flustered, it was moving very quickly for Quinn? How much of the play calling and overall schematic approach from Steve Sarkisian changed from the first half to the second half and then lasting into the SEC championship game?
I thought it was I didn't notice many of those double moves, ag beaters in the first half. I think he ultimately realized, man, these guys are so fast and they're so keyed and they're so well prepared. I got to find some way to use that against them, and give Sark a lot of credit. He did in the second half. I think that was one of the best. Like I said, once you realize what Georgia was doing, that was one of the best kind of countermeasures that he took, and he continued it. He started out the SEC title game though with him. He started out that game with the reverse whip early, I think on the first drive. That was his 3rd down. He's like, I got something for you. So he was learning. Sorry, I'll give him credit, man. He came out swinging in the SEC title game. Yeah,
he did. He definitely did. And that was an interesting game too, looking back, rewatching it. You had 4 penalties on your wide receivers in that game, right? It was not a game where Isaiah Bond was looking back and saying, hey, NFL scouts, check this game out for me. He had 3 on himself, and he actually had I believe that's how the first drive of the game stalled out, was a dropped comeback it wasn't a pretty start for him. And you don't necessarily count on penalties for your wide receivers, right? So that's interesting. I wanted to pivot a little bit towards what we might see this upcoming, I guess in 2 weeks, Rod, because this Texas offense has certainly evolved as the season has gone on. It's undeniable. Texas starting to utilize more 11 personnel. The quick game has come to life.
Yep.
I don't know against the Georgia defense that we've seen. And look, this isn't the Georgia defense that we've come to know over the last 5 or 6 years. It just quite frankly is not. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But do you foresee the quick passes continuing to be a strength for the Texas pass game? Or is this an opportunity, to your point, where the ag beaters or some of these double moves come back to life and Texas is able to benefit off of the aggression of a Georgia back 7?
I think you do have to try it early on, because like you said, it's not quite the same Georgia defense,
right?
But you have to test it and see. So I would, if I'm Sark, I still will start there, because you've been so great at it for the last 5 quarters or so. And that would give you an indicator of maybe you could, and maybe you want to, that's the way you want to start. Maybe you want to start because Georgia's going to be keyed in on your quick game because of the last couple of weeks. And then you want to start out with the ag beater. You want to start out with the, stalk, block, and go, or start out with the double move, or start out with.
Is it too obvious? The first play the last 2 weeks has been that quick bubble screen. I mean, that swing screen.
I don't.
It was too obvious to attach a hitch and go on it.
Because I think I think they're just better athletes, right? Better athletes in space. They're going to tackle better in open space. Yeah. I still think you should try it, but my belief is that they're not going to be able to benefit as much from that short, quick game. That you may get a few extra yards out of it, but Georgia's speed overall, their overall athleticism outside, is just going to shrink that margin for error for you. So you better have other, concepts in mind that to counter that.
Yeah,
I think Georgia's going to take it away.
I absolutely. And they took it away last year, right? In the 2 games Texas played, Texas was 15 of 17 on passes behind or at the line of scrimmage. That's great. But they only went for about 56 yards. So do the math there. That's only a smidge above 3.3 yards per completion. That's not great, right? And against a Georgia team, especially on the outside that has so much speed, going east to west is normally not a recipe for success, which is interesting when you compare it to this year's team. Rod, there's room to be had with this Georgia secondary. I think it's been pretty interesting. Now, teams haven't been completing the deep ball all too often, right? I had it written down earlier, 8 of 27 on passes beyond 20 yards down the field. The one team that did have a lot of success was Tennessee. And what does that tell me? Well, you look at that Josh Heupel offense, they spread the width of the field, they take post shots, they go deep, and they had success. They had 5 completions, 4 of them ending up being touchdowns there. There should be some room if Texas were to get wide, and of course, targets to motion going to play a big key for this Texas offense as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, CJ, because it's actually been one of the main ingredients in their new offensive recipe the last couple of weeks. Arch is completing 88% of his targets to motion, over 16 yards per attempt on targets to motion in the last couple of games. So it's definitely been one of their best cheat codes, obviously starting out with the same play in back-to-back weeks to Ryan Wingo, which is targets to motion. Yeah. In the Georgia game, the first matchup, in the first half of that first matchup, you can tell Sark knew he had something with targets to motion, probably because Georgia plays a lot of man-to-man coverage. And he played man-to-man, what he did against Texas anyway. Played a lot of man-to-man coverage, more than the average. Then targets to motion works really well in terms of DB. I have to give any receiver that's motioning, because they usually could be motioning toward the formation array, toward a bunch. I give them space. I have to give them cushion. So you force DBs to be less aggressive. And the rules, everybody's rules for motion, every defense's rule, every coverage rule is different in terms of how they approach and how they deal with motion. And I think Sark, who we know that it's a vital sign within his offense, this is how he weaponizes motion, is when he targets to motion. So against Georgia first half, you had 3 targets to motion, but they were all on third down in the first half of that first game versus Georgia, which lets me know that at least he was using them in critical moments, which means I think a lot of the targets to motion are predetermined reads. I don't know that for a fact. It just feels like that. I think Sark is trying to scheme guys open with targets to motion, but he was stubborn about it, and he felt like it would work. So in the second half of that game versus Georgia, you saw 7 targets to motion. He continued to use a lot of targets to motion, and you got some of your best plays off of targets to motion. That first 24-yard reception to Matthew Golden of that first half, that was a target to motion. That Isaiah Bond touchdown ended up being a target to motion, does the kind of the zigzag motion to get him open as well. That was ended up being a target to motion. The Jaden Blue touchdown on the Texas route, they were in empty formation, and then they actually go from empty formation, and then they end up taking Jaden Blue, trying to figure out who they are isolating on that matchup, and they reload the backfield with Jaden Blue, and then boom, he's able to get that linebacker matched up one-on-one, and they score on that. So that was also a target to motion. So you ended up with some of your best plays being targets to motion in that game. Overall, 60% targets to motion in that matchup. Both of your touchdowns in that first matchup ended up being targets to motion. You did have an interception early on in the first half off of targets to motion because you had such a disastrous first half, but it ended up being one of your more successful concepts. So Sark, he carried it over to that second game in the SEC title game. Give him a ton of credit. You end up with 13 total targets to motion in the game. We also had an interception, but overall 119 total yards on targets to motion on 13 attempts. So you were over 9 yards per attempt on targets to motion. Your first down rate in targets to motion ended up being 38% first down rate off of your targets to motion. You had 2 explosive plays, so you were 15% explosive play rate off of targets to motion. And so it ended up being one of your more successful concepts throughout that game. You had a 32-yard reception off of targets to motion. Or in that game, you had a 50-yarder to Matthew Golden early on in that game to end up being another target to motion. You had a 12-yarder to Helm on a screen that ended up being a target to motion. So I thought it was one of your best concepts, and Sark really weaponized it, and he was stubborn about it and played the hits in it with the SEC title game. And I think you'll get it again in this matchup coming up versus Georgia because it's been so successful for them recently, and it was so successful for them versus Georgia in the first 2 matchups.
There's a number of ways that I think Sark can approach this game, to your point. And what we've been trying to convey over the last, 2 or 3 months is 11 personnel is a strength for this team. And what Texas has done, or at least did against Vanderbilt a week ago is utilize motion out of that 11 personnel. It was a season high 53% of pre-snap motions at the time of the snap. On top of that, 73% of your snaps ended up in 11 personnel, Rod. So for a team that plays a lot of man coverage and likes to be aggressive, there are two things that are trending in the direction of helping your offense organically create ways to beat man coverage, right? Keep your fastest, quickest guys on the field a little bit more. Use some extra pre-snap motion to give them that head start. I look back to the SEC championship game. It was DeAndre Moore with 9 receptions for 115 yards and that big 40-yard score late in the game that helped, elevate that team, that performance offensively. The one thing that I wanted to get to real quick, the play action game, because this kind of goes against what we've talked about and how we've kind of conveyed this difference between Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. Quinn, obviously a great play action quarterback. Arch Manning, not necessarily a great play action quarterback.
Yeah.
During no play action a year ago with Quinn, on just straight normal dropbacks, he was 19 of 36 for about 300 yards. 19 of 36, 300 yards, 3 interceptions, 2 touchdowns. Not his biggest strength. On straight dropbacks, you're looking at 23 of 33. So much better, much more efficient in that regard. Does that move or does that translate to this year with Arch? As we've seen in straight dropbacks, he's playing 7-on-7 when given protection. He's been much better in straight dropbacks than Quinn Ewers, and he's not had the success last year that Texas saw in play action. My question is, how much of that play action approach does Texas utilize against Georgia in 2 weeks? That remains to be seen.
Everything slow developing versus Georgia is a risk.
Screen, throw it away.
Yeah, it is, because the outside zone, right? It didn't work as well. You need things that are going to hit quickly versus Georgia. They, not saying there won't be opportunities, but those windows close fast. So I think that's ultimately what you want. You'd want something. That's why straight drop back, in my opinion, works a little bit better. Now, Sark likes the deceptive passing game where you can use the RPO and use the play action and suck those linebackers up so you can attack that intermediate area of the field. And I think there'll be opportunities for it, but especially when your run game isn't working at all and they don't really respect your run game. Yeah. And, like I say, it's a slow developing play that takes a lot of time and you need pass protection. And that's been an issue. I wonder if I would try to stay away from some of the slowest developing play action concepts for Sark. The ones you're trying to get way, way downfield. The quick hitters I get. I mean, there's sometimes where it's play action, but it's ultimately just a clear window. And it still ends up being the ball out of his hands relatively quickly. I would stay away from the long developing stuff, though, against Georgia, rather in the run game and in the passing game.
Yeah, I totally agree. However, this is a Georgia team who, as we've talked about at the very beginning of the episode, not the Georgia team that we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years under Kirby Smart. I got a couple stats for you here, Rod. And for the folks at home, this might blow your mind just a little bit. Georgia sits 132nd out of 136 teams through 10 weeks of this 2025 college football season. They have 8 sacks. 132nd out of 136, 8 sacks. They sit 135th out of 136 with only 29 tackles for loss. Of their 8 sacks, 6 of them coming from C.J. Allen and Chris Cole, excuse me. So, look, they come from the second level, and that's something that I think Texas needs to be wary of. So, a lot of change in comparison from a year ago to obviously when Texas goes over to Athens. But, Rod, I wanted to leave you the final word here. What is it about Sarkisian figuring out, quote unquote, the Georgia defense that should give Texas some optimism going into Athens?
I think ultimately Sark has figured out a couple of cheat codes that he believes works against the Kirby scheme, not just specific players. He may actually find player matchups he likes as well, especially on the back end and the secondary. You just got to find a way to get to them, and that means you need time to do it. But I think one of the things, and I've been talking about this all season long, is one thing that really carried over from that first game to the second game that we didn't talk about was targets to bunch formation. And even this season, it's been really successful for Arch. In that first matchup, about 53% completion percentage. So it wasn't great, but you did end up with 2 explosive plays, and you didn't have many in that first matchup.
No.
And that was in the second half when you started utilizing a lot more of these cheat codes. And what I like about them, you combine the cheat codes, right? Targets to bunch, so bunch is close to groups of receivers, but motion into and out of that bunch, right? And then you can throw two targets to motion out of that bunch. So you can combine some of these cheat codes and concepts, right? You can run double moves out of bunch. So I think that's important too against Georgia. You give yourself a better chance for success when you compound and you stack these concepts. So in the SEC title game, Sark learned targets to bunch. You were up to 63% completion percentage, 9.5 yards per attempt. And you were your third down conversion rate was 40% when you were targeting bunch, and you ended up with a 36% first down touchdown rate. So that's pretty good. 18% explosive play rate because you had 2 of those as well. So my thing was, I think they should be better because Sark, I think now has a blueprint or at least some concepts that can help him, build a blueprint to beat Georgia because these things work versus his scheme.
Yeah.
And they're not just versus a certain player, but versus his scheme because you played him twice. And like we said, when you found him in the second half versus Georgia, you were able to use some of these same concepts in the second game. And you started out the game with those concepts, came out swinging.
Yeah, they certainly did, and they'll need to do exactly that on the road in Athens. Big caveat here is obviously the offensive line. I wanted to end with this: 56 pressures a year ago in the 2 games combined. Look, Texas against Vanderbilt a week ago, 6 pressures allowed. It was the fewest by about 12 or 13 against the Power 4 team this year. Does that mean they will completely stymie that front 7? No, because I do think Kirby Smart will dial it up, just as we're talking about Steve Sarkisian dialing it up on the offensive side of the ball. But if that is a trend, it is certainly heading in the positive direction with the current offensive line in place for the Texas Longhorns. But Rod, thank you very much for the time and the expertise. This was fantastic. A lot of numbers here, a lot to keep eye on whenever Texas heads to Athens. Targets to motion, targets out of bunch, of course, the quick passing game, the play action, and traditional dropbacks, as well as what Georgia does to create and generate pressure of their own, because they haven't been able to do that very consistently this year.
Amazing.
I know it. So thank you very much, Rod. This has been another episode of On Texas Football. You guys have a wonderful weekend, and until next time, we'll see y'all soon. Welcome.